Behind dim candlelight and slowly closing doors, plantation halls whispered secrets that history long ignored. Shadows stretched across polished floors, flickering on ornate furniture that bore witness to acts so filthy, so unspeakable, that the world was never meant to see them. History has taught us of slavery's brutality, the chains, the whips, the endless labor, but some horrors were hidden, confined to the private domain of white mistresses who wielded authority over enslaved men and women in ways that were terrifyingly intimate. What nasty acts did they commit when no one else was watching? And how did those who suffered endure abuses in silence, trapped between fear, survival, and an invisible, unrecorded oppression? The walls of these mansions hid the darkest corners of power, revealing a dimension of slavery that textbooks rarely acknowledge, yet one that shaped the bodies, minds, and spirits of the enslaved. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the American South was a theater of grandeur built upon the labor of the enslaved. Majestic mansions, white columns glinting in the sunlight, sprawling verandas and manicured gardens presented a picture of wealth and refinement. Yet behind these facades, small, crowded quarters housed men, women, and children whose lives were dictated by labor, fear, and submission. Within this household hierarchy, white mistresses held authority over domestic life and private spaces, often unchecked by society. Outwardly refined, they privately exercised control that extended far beyond household chores or the enforcement of manners. Power seeped into private lives in ways that were sometimes shocking, perverse, and always deliberate. Behind every polished door and heavy curtain, secrets of abuse waited, hidden, unspoken, and carefully concealed from history. Control on plantations extended beyond the whip and labor quotas. Enslaved men and women were vulnerable to coercion, isolation, and intimidation. White mistresses manipulated, threatened, and coerced, turning authority into a weapon over both flesh and mind. Fear was constant. Obedience was survival. Threats, real or implied, ensured compliance, and deviation could mean punishment or social reprisal. In the shadows of grandeur, authority became a tool of domination, shaping lives in ways that left invisible scars. But what exactly happened behind these closed doors, in private rooms and attics where no eyes could watch, no ears could listen, and no law could intervene? Secret chambers, bedrooms, and attics became sites of sexual manipulation and coercion, where the private desires and frustrations of those in power were imposed on the enslaved. Diaries, letters, and oral histories reveal consistent patterns of abuse carefully hidden from the public eye. Intimacy became terror, and obedience became a currency for survival. The enslaved were trapped, unable to speak, unable to escape, and often unsure whether any human justice existed for what they endured. These acts were invisible to the outside world, yet their impact was devastating. Psychologically, emotionally, and physically. Every interaction could carry humiliation, fear, and a loss of dignity, leaving marks that generations would carry in silence. The human toll was staggering. Emotional trauma manifested as fear, anxiety, shame, and the erosion of identity. Physical consequences ranged from exhaustion and injuries to forced pregnancies and bodily violations. The psychological scars stretched beyond the individual, affecting families and communities for generations. The plantation system did not merely enslave bodies. It invaded the most intimate aspects of human life, shaping identity under the shadow of coercion. And yet, these stories were deliberately erased from historical memory, rendered invisible by the veneer of refinement and civility, leaving victims voiceless and silenced for centuries. For centuries, the abuses committed behind closed doors remained hidden, erased from public record by a society unwilling to imagine that women could wield such intimate, destructive power. Yet the evidence persisted. Diaries tucked away in attics, letters forgotten in drawers, and oral histories passed down through generations. Slowly, historians began to uncover the grim reality. Coerced sexual experiences, intimidation, and psychological manipulation executed by white mistresses, shaping the lives and bodies of the enslaved in ways long ignored. Positions once described as privileged were revealed as tools of control, mechanisms of isolation and submission. When these hidden truths confronted the public, society was forced to face the uncomfortable reality that cruelty did not reside solely in the overseer or the master. It also lived behind the genteel facade of the mistress. What does it mean when secrets so long buried are finally exposed? It means acknowledging the full scope of human suffering and the corrosive nature of unchecked authority. The revelation of these hidden abuses reverberated across academic and descendant communities. Disbelief, shock, and moral outrage challenged the myths of genteel mistresses and plantation refinement. Male victims, long excluded from narratives of slavery, were finally recognized, their suffering acknowledged alongside female victims. Families confronted uncomfortable truths about their ancestors, wrestling with shame, complicity, and the reality that intimate cruelty had thrived in private spaces. These stories force us to confront the intersections of gender, power, and race, revealing how a system designed to uphold control could produce acts so intimate, secret, and disturbing that their recognition shakes our understanding of history itself. Even now, countless acts remain unspoken, still hidden in the shadows of plantation walls, waiting for scrutiny to illuminate them. Isolation and social privilege enabled some mistresses to wield authority unchecked, creating conditions where abuse could flourish. Constrained by societal expectations in public but empowered in private, these women exploited power dynamics to impose their desires upon the enslaved. Gender, race, and hierarchy intersected to form secret spaces where dominance, frustration, and entitlement combined, producing abuses that were deliberate, intimate, and psychologically devastating. Control became both a coping mechanism and an assertion of authority, a tool to exert influence where society limited women elsewhere. These acts were terrifying, unforgettable, and calculated, exposing the dark potential of unaccountable power. Understanding them does not excuse them, but it illuminates the complex interplay of oppression, privilege, and secrecy within plantation households. Even amid the horror, the enslaved exhibited resilience and subtle resistance. Small gestures, a glance, a carefully chosen word, a coded refusal, became acts of defiance, reclaiming fragments of dignity under extreme duress. Oral traditions and whispered family memories preserved these stories, ensuring that the experiences of survival endured even when the details of abuse were concealed. Every act of quiet resistance, every choice to endure, was a reclamation of humanity in a world determined to strip it away. Survival required ingenuity, courage, and a constant vigilance against the whims of those who held power over both body and soul. The very spaces of the plantation bear witness to these hidden acts. Sunlight filtering through cracked shutters illuminates abandoned rooms, dusty floors, and broken furniture, each silent testimony to coercion, intimidation, and silenced suffering. These walls tell a story of abuse, manipulation, and resilience, a story that demands acknowledgement. To confront these truths is to confront the full horror of slavery, not merely as labor exploitation but as the invasion of private, intimate lives. By recognizing and teaching these histories, we honor victims and prevent the repetition of abuses, ensuring that the lessons of the past remain present in our conscience. History holds the echoes of those silenced. The sexual lives of the enslaved were controlled, violated, and manipulated by white mistresses who wielded private power with devastating effect. These truths confront us with the reality of human cruelty, but also with the courage, endurance, and subtle defiance of those who survived. To deny these histories is to deny the full scope of Black history, Black culture, and the hidden stories that illuminate the interplay of race, gender, and power. Plantation walls may have concealed these crimes for centuries, but the truth now demands to be seen, acknowledged, and remembered. The doors may have hidden their acts, but history insists that we confront them, reckon with them, and honor the voices of the silenced. Even centuries later, the echoes of these hidden abuses refuse to fade. Empty rooms, shuttered windows, and dust-laden floors do more than mark the passage of time. They hold memory. The walls themselves remember the whispered commands, the forced compliance, the terror mingled with shame. enslaved men and women were compelled to navigate a world where their bodies, desires, and identities were never fully their own. Every glance, every touch, every coerced act became a negotiation for survival. The cruelty was not random. It was structured, deliberate, and methodical, wielded in secret by those whose social standing shielded them from scrutiny. These were not fleeting moments of moral lapse. They were systematic exercises of power, disturbing in their precision and invisible to polite society. Generations of descendants carry the weight of this hidden history. Psychological scars, patterns of silence, and disrupted family structures emerged as the lingering imprint of abuses that went unspoken for centuries. Black male slaves and female victims alike endured emotional trauma that would ripple through time, shaping perceptions of identity, trust, and authority. These were not merely individual tragedies. They were social fractures, wounds inflicted on communities and cultures, leaving legacies of pain and survival entwined. To study these hidden abuses is to confront the uncomfortable reality that slavery was a deeply personal violation, one that infiltrated the most private aspects of life and reshaped entire societies in its shadow. Yet within the darkness, acts of defiance and endurance illuminate the human spirit. The enslaved found ways to survive, to assert agency, even in the most harrowing circumstances. Small gestures, secret acts of communication, coded refusals, or the quiet maintenance of dignity became lifelines. Oral traditions preserved fragments of truth that official records could not, passing down stories of endurance, resistance, and courage. The enslaved were not simply victims. They were survivors, navigating horrors imposed by a society and by individuals who saw power as entitlement. Their stories demand recognition, not only for the suffering endured but for the extraordinary resilience that allowed them to endure the unthinkable. Modern scholarship continues to uncover these disturbing truths. Letters, diaries, and oral histories reveal patterns of female-perpetrated abuse long ignored or dismissed. Academic studies, community investigations, and descendant research challenge the sanitized myths of plantation life, forcing society to confront its assumptions. The sexual control and manipulation exercised by white mistresses disrupts conventional narratives, insisting that power, gender, and race must be understood as intertwined forces with the capacity to shape lives in devastating ways. These revelations break hearts, shock the conscience, and compel reflection on how privilege and secrecy enabled abuses that could exist invisibly for generations. The haunting presence of these spaces, rooms long abandoned, floors worn by footsteps of fear, light streaming through decayed shutters, serves as a reminder that history is alive in its traces. The sexual lives of the enslaved were never entirely their own. They were invaded, controlled, and manipulated, leaving scars that words can only partially describe. Remembering these truths honors victims, teaches the consequences of unchecked authority, and confronts society with the unflinching realities of power used for pleasure at the expense of human dignity. Silence is no longer an option. The stories preserved in shadows, in whispers, and in hidden records must be acknowledged, studied, and remembered. The doors may have hidden their crimes for centuries, but history now insists that we confront them. The mansion halls, the attics, the private chambers, these spaces, once secret, now demand that the world see the extent of abuses that occurred within them. To reckon with these truths is to honor Black history, Black culture, and the silenced voices that endured unimaginable cruelty. As sunlight filters through shutters and illuminates rooms left empty for generations, we are reminded that power, when unchecked and secret, can destroy lives quietly, leaving long shadows across time. Yet the courage, resilience, and subtle defiance of the enslaved survive, teaching us that even in the darkest corners, humanity can endure.